Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Lily and this is Lily in the Library. Really quick, it is stormy outside, so if you guys hear thunder or anything like that, there is a thunderstorm passing over us, so just bear with me. So this is going to be my June wrap up. There's going to be some books on here from that I finished in May. A couple of them I didn't catch when I was doing my May wrap up. I had already read them and reviewed them, but for whatever reason, I just didn't see them on my list. And then there are some that I read after that wrap up that I finished after that wrap up. So we're just going to count them in my June wrap up. In this video, we're going to be talking about 21 books, two of which I physically have here to show you. I do a majority of my reading through audiobooks. I've touched on this in other videos. It just makes it a little bit easier for me. I am dyslexic. I do have a hard time consistently reading in a book and focusing on that. I won't get too much into it here. If you guys are curious, I can do a separate video or discussion about that as well. So I want to get right into the reviews because we do have quite a few books. I have my little list written down here, so if you see me looking off screen, that's what I'm looking at. Hey, popping in because I'm editing this video and I realized that I was having a lot of issues this day with the two videos I recorded. This one I believe is the one where the mic ended up going out at the end and I had to re-record everything. Like I only got 11 minutes of it. But in the beginning, I didn't realize that the mic was very staticky, so I tried to cut out as much as I could. I'm obviously not going to go back in and like redo everything, but there were a couple of things that I talked about that I am just completely cutting out because it's so irritating, and I don't think I have this issue throughout the rest of the video, so please bear with me for the little bit that it's there. I talk about the DNF that I had for May, which was The Idea of You by Robin Lee. I made it to about, I think, 20 or 30%, somewhere around there. It's been such a long time now, I don't remember. I still remember how cringy this book was, how terrible it was. The only reason why I was reading this was because I really did want to watch the Anne Hathaway movie on Prime. And after reading what I read, I don't care. Like, if this is what the movie is about, I don't think it's for me. I was thinking it was going to be something more along the lines of One Day, and I was very sad to find out that it was not. So it's a hard pass for me, DNF. The other two books that I had discussed in this portion, and I'm only cutting out part of the last one because the mic does recover. But the first one is Only If You're Lucky by Stacy Willingham. I believe I gave it 5 stars. It was a really great book. I love Stacy Willingham. I have enjoyed everything she's written so far. I think I've given all 3 of her books that I've read 5 stars. So this was no different. It takes place in the summertime. Well, okay. It starts off in the summertime, but it kind of goes throughout because they're college kids. So it kind of goes throughout their time at college. I cannot remember what the main characters' names are. I just remember that the one girl that we're following, she leaves her smaller town after, she's going to college and stuff, but after her best friend dies. And the situation around her best friend's death is mysterious. We don't really know what happened. It's not really explained. I mean, it does get explained in the end, but that's part of like the mystery of the book. And then while she's away at college, she also connects with this girl that's there who's very similar to her best friend. Like, she makes a lot of mentions about how they could be twins or something like that. Makes friends with these girls. I believe it's her second year in college because I don't think she meets them as she's a freshman. So she makes friends with these girls. They all end up living together on campus housing. There's a fraternity next door, and they're the ones that actually own the house. Now, it's kind of weird from the jump, like her moving in there. The house is not great. It's kind of in disrepair. But, obviously that's not a high priority for these college kids. Also, the rent is super cheap, so it's something that they can afford and not have to live in the dorms. There's all of the typical things you might expect from a college place setting. You know, there's frat parties and different dramas going on, and there are a few allusions to like sexual assault and stuff like that. So I would just keep that in mind. It is very brief. It's kind of a little bit of a recurring thing that happens, but it is pretty brief. It's not too much of a distraction. It's definitely not really the focus. There's murders, of course. That's kind of like the whole thing. Their best friend goes missing. Like, just from the way it starts in the beginning, it's just very interesting. I would highly recommend this book. It's great. And then on to a book I did not love, although I did give it 3 stars for a few reasons, and that is What Lies in the Woods by Katie Ellis Marshall. I know a lot of other people enjoyed this book. I was not one of them. I just found it to be extremely slow and boring. I feel like not a lot happens. There's like one thing we're trying to figure out. I didn't really care for this book. I think I get into it a little bit more in the part that's like not all crackly, so I will just let past me take it away. And it wasn't even that long. It was a thriller, and I was not thrilled. The twist was, it wasn't predictable, but it's like at the end we got a reveal, and then a reveal, and then a reveal, and then a reveal. Mind you, nothing's going on in the whole rest of the book. Like there's one event, and then we're trying to solve 2 things, but nothing else is happening the entirety of the book. And then at the very end, it's like reveal, 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 twist, 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 twist. In like the last chapter, in the last 5 to 10% of the book. What you could have spread this out through the entire book, like at least some of it, or given us like little nods or little clues or anything to make the book more interesting. I wasn't a fan. Then the books that I read after my wrap up, which are still in May, would be Diavola by Jennifer Thorne. I read this for the Book Troop Book Club pick by hosted by Gabby Reeds, and I really enjoyed the book overall. I believe I gave it a 3 or a 4 star. I found it to be really entertaining. The main character, I just really felt for her. I think her name was Anna. Her family was atrocious. Absolutely hated all of them, especially the brother and his, I think, boyfriend. I don't think they were married. Christopher, not Chris. Yeah. I'm so glad that events happened in this book because that hated that. The book takes place partly in Italy and also partly in New York. I didn't think it was going to spend as much time in the States as it did. And for me, that's where it kind of lost traction because while we were in Italy and we're staying in this villa that's supposedly haunted, that all the locals are like, oh my gosh, you're staying there? Are you sure you want to stay there? And creepy things do happen. We do build up to things, but there's not a lot that's really going on. There's still this air of just creepiness, which I really enjoyed, and I was hoping for us to keep that going. But then when we get to the latter half of the book where she's now in New York and trying to go about her daily life, it just seemed to fall a little bit flat for me, and I didn't care for the ending as well. There was one thing that happened while she's in New York that I laughed about. I thought it was really funny, but she almost gets used to what's going on. And at that point, it's just like, okay. There's also, throughout the book, there's chunks of time that are missing that we're never really explained what's going on during that time. There's one scene, they lose a chunk of time, the entire family loses a chunk of time when they're in Italy. I don't really think this is a spoiler because I'm not going to say what happens, but that is the only time that we find out anything that happens during these blackout periods where time is just missing. The other times, there's some things that allude to what may have been going on, but it's just not enough of an explanation for the amount of time that we're losing. So I did enjoy it overall. Didn't care for the ending. Didn't care. Oh my god, the family. Her family, especially her sister, was just insufferable. I hated the way they were constantly like, oh, getting, because she's the only one who speaks Italian. and they were constantly asking her questions, about things in Italian, asking her to translate, but she was such an afterthought, and they completely blamed her when things went wrong in any aspect, not just on this trip, but throughout their lives in general. And they were just so toxic, and I just hated them. So she did that representation very well. I feel like that part, I'm pretty sure we were supposed to hate the family, and I did. So good job. The next book I read was When She Was Me by Marley Bush. I don't remember why I read this, like who I saw read this, and I wanted to read it, but I don't think I rated it very highly. I want to say I gave it 2 stars. I found it very confusing. I did listen to the audiobook, and the main characters are twins. Like I get that, but even when someone is a twin, there's still identifiable things that make them different where you can tell them apart, at least in my experience. Uh, when I was listening to this book, the narrator never changed her voice up. She never, not the cadence, not the speed at which she spoke. So it was very difficult to know who was talking when once you were throughout the chapter. Obviously, in the beginning, she'll say who is speaking, but once you get further in, it's like, wait, whose point of view am I reading this from right now? So for me, it was just a little bit. I mean, yes, the sisters are vastly different. One is basically agoraphobic, and the other one is a little bit more outgoing. But she also has her own mental issues. So it's kind of like, I don't know. For a long time, I really thought there was no twin and it was just one girl. But then, yeah, I didn't find the book to be all that interesting. It felt a little bit difficult for me to get through. For all those reasons, I did not rate it very highly. Next up, I have Book Lovers by Emily Henry, which was my first Emily Henry book that I have ever read, and I feel like it was a great introduction. I enjoyed the relationship, I enjoyed the small town vibes, I enjoyed the little side story with the sister and the sister's family, and them trying to save the bookstore, them editing this book together. I just thought it was so cute, and I gave it 4 stars. It was such a great introduction to Emily Henry, I feel like. So I'm really excited to keep reading more from her. I also read The Midnight Library, and I really enjoyed this book as well. I knew it was going to touch on topics of grief and suicide and loss and things like that, but I wasn't sure how it was going to handle these topics. And I feel like it did a magnificent job of tackling these things. I would highly recommend this book for anyone, regardless of what situation you're in, because it can provide such a different perspective and different ways of seeing and thinking about things. This book was so thought provoking. I just really had a great time with it. I gave it 5 stars. Then moving on to the books I have read in June, I have 3 DNFs. The first is Catherine House by Elizabeth Thomas. I made it to, I believe, about 60% of the way in the book, and absolutely nothing was happening. I was bored. I didn't want to keep reading. I mean, I did, but I didn't. I wanted to know what the hype about this book was, so I really wanted to make it to the end, but I put the book down for about 2 weeks, and at no point during those 2 weeks did I want to pick this book back up. In fact, it was just like weighing on me and causing me anxiety to even have this book and thinking about continuing to read it. So I DNF'd it. I also DNF'd Lies and Weddings by Kevin Kwan. I made it to 45% way in the book. I do have a reading vlog where I discuss this book a little bit more in depth, what my issues are with it in real time while I'm reading the book. I hate this book. Once we got to the part of the book where we're no longer in Hawaii, I absolutely did not care. I didn't care about the characters from the beginning. This book was just really hard for me to get through what I got through. And the only reason why I did is because we were in Hawaii. And even then, I suffered through horrible mispronunciation, atrocious accents, and absolutely everything coming back to money, brand names, designer labels, what kind of boat we're on, what kind of plane we're flying. I don't care. I don't care. And I could not find anything likable about really any of these characters. I didn't care. And the narrator did not help at all. So DNF. I also DNF'd When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. I do go in a little more depth about this, kind of like a little rant about this book. Um, a summary is I don't like, especially in a fiction book, when someone brings across their opinions as facts or kind of tells you how you should think and feel. I'm not here for that in any kind of book, but especially not in a fiction book where I'm trying to get away from real world situations. And I especially don't want someone telling me how to think. So, like I said in the video where I discuss this, I will not be reading anything else from this author. The book seemed to be poorly written. I'm good. The first book I read in the month of June was The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. I have heard amazing things about this. I heard it was great. I heard it was so twisty. I heard it was just like this really scary book. It was none of those things for me. I did give it 3 stars because it grabbed me initially, and then the ending was very like, what? Like, I had not anticipated that at all. There was no way I would have really seen that coming. If there were any clues to this, I was not picking that up. My favorite character of the entire book was, I believe her name is Olivia, the very religious cat, which had me laughing every time. Well, until the end, I would say. But yeah, this book seemed endless to me. It took a very long time to get to the point. There was a lot of things I feel like we could have cut out and it would have been just fine had we done so. I don't know. We spent a lot of time meandering in this book, and because of that, I did not really care for it. Like, I just wanted it to be over. Then I also read Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. 5 stars for both of them. I enjoyed the world building, I enjoyed the characters, the war, the gods, the everything. I really loved this book. I enjoyed the romantic aspects of it, the cliffhangers that I was left on, the heart wrenching pain that I dealt with in some parts was so good. I ate these books up within 2 weeks, and that's only because I paced myself for Ruthless Vows because Divine Rivals I read, I believe, in 1 or 2 days. But I tried to stretch out the Ruthless Vows book because I wanted to remain in this world that Rebecca Ross has built, and it was just it was so good. I love this book. The next book I read is This Is How You Lose the Time War, and I gave this 3 stars. I just wanted a little bit more from the book. It was good. There was nothing really wrong with it. I just felt like there could have been more to the romance story. I mean, it says it's a twisting sapphic time travel fantasy love story that never stops surprising. Readers will reach the end and want to turn back to the start. No, I don't want to turn back to the start. There wasn't much to this book. So I was a little bit disappointed in that aspect, which is the main reason why I gave it 3 stars. But what there was good. One of my favorite quotes from this book is, "Eating's gross, isn't it? In the abstract, I mean. When you're used to hyperspace recharging stations, to sunlight and cosmic rays, when most of the beauty you've known lies in a great machine's heart, it's hard to see the appeal of using bones that poke from spit-coated gums to mash things that grew in dirt into a paste that will fit down the wet tube connecting your mouth to the sack of acid under your heart." Yuck. That's one of the parts that really grabbed me. Another of my favorite quotes is, "Words hurt, but metaphors go between like bridges, and words are like stone to build bridges, hewn from the earth in agony, but making a new thing, a shared thing, a thing that's more than one shift." And the last quote that I really loved is, "I would rather break the world than lose you." So, what this book was good. It had a lot of good things in it, but I expected more from it. I expected more elements to this sapphic romance, and it just wasn't there, and it just fell a little short in that regard for me. Next thing I read was Beach Read, also by Emily Henry. I gave that one as 3 stars. It just wasn't as compelling to me. I did end up putting it down, and I read the majority of it in a day. I don't know. Relationship was a little bit more unbelievable. I don't feel the main character really discussed or dealt with her grief and the things she was going through. There's this whole other relationship aspect um, almost from the beginning of the book, and we barely touch on that, and the other person in the relationship is like hardly ever seen. I don't know, it just, to me, it felt a little bit flat having read Book Lovers from her. I expected a little bit more. It was a cute little story, but it just wasn't, it just didn't go enough for me. The next book I read is The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner, and this is the first book that I fully annotated. I absolutely loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. I felt like the pacing of this book was great from the beginning to the end. I really enjoyed this. There was one thing in the end I didn't really care for, but aside from that, I cannot fault this book at all. I think the conversations taking place in this book are very interesting and important. There's a lot of commentary on women, a lot of commentary on how being a mother, how not being a mother, how being a wife, how not being a wife impacts women, how small our world is, and just the ways in which women are written off or forgotten that a man would never be written off or forgotten. So I think it's great. There's a lot of sub-level discussion going on that just a surface read you maybe wouldn't get. But I think this is a pretty deep book. I have never read anything like this before, and I thought the way it handled things was very beautiful. Really quickly, it is taking place in 2 different timelines, present day and I believe the 1700s. In present day, we're following a woman named Caroline who's dealing with her marriage gone awry. She's arrived in London on her 10-year anniversary trip without her husband. Quickly find out why that is. She finds in the Thames a jar with a little bear etched onto it, and from there we are following this mystery of where this jar came from, what this jar means, and all the other things that have to do with the apothecary. In the 1700s, we are following the apothecary Nella and her little helper Elizabeth, I think is her name. And what she's doing and the misfortunes that befall her soon thereafter. It was such a good book. It was so fun to read. I flew through it in, I believe, a few days. It was just so good. I have a lot of great quotes in this book, but there's one that I really enjoyed, and it's from the viewpoint of Caroline. And she says, her support reminded me that it was okay for friends to venture down different paths. And I just felt like that was so heartwarming. So much of this book really touched my heart, and I really enjoyed it, and I highly, highly recommend it. Next is the reappearance of Rachel Price. I had almost no expectations from this. I've never read anything by Holly Jackson before, so I wasn't really sure what to expect. A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series has been received very well, but I wasn't sure about this book, and I hadn't heard too many people talking about it. The audiobook, I believe, was 15 hours long, which is a little bit long for a thriller or mystery in my experience. But I went into it just kind of curious and hoping for the best, and I was not disappointed. This was another 5-star read for me. I enjoyed this book so much. I did not want to stop listening to it. I had to know what was happening. We are following the Price family. I believe what is the main character's name? Annabelle. We're following mainly Annabelle, her father Charlie, and the cousin Carter. I don't remember what the cousin's parents' names were. It's very interesting. Obviously, the book is called The Reappearance of Rachel Price. So Rachel Price is Annabelle's mother who went missing about 16 years ago, I think, and one day just reappears. And from there, the book really takes off. There is so much going on, so many red herrings that are just done in such a way. This book was amazing. I had quite a few like low-rated books that I wasn't having a good time with, and this book just came in and made me feel so revitalized. So I highly recommend this book. I have another couple of 2-star reads: House at the Bottom of the Lake by Josh Malerman and Don't You Cry by Mary Kubica. I was really disappointed in the Mary Kubica book because I have read something from her previously and it was so good. I loved it so much. And while it was slow, there were things continuously happening. But in Don't You Cry, I just felt like it was slow the entire way, and there was very little happening, very little twists, very little information really given to us about what was going on until the end. And then, like, the last 15 to 20% of the book was just like everything that I feel like we could have been getting throughout the entirety of the book, and we just weren't. So I don't know. And the ending, it just this book just really fell flat for me. I just was not having a good time reading it. And the same can be said for House at the Bottom of the Lake. I expected it to be a little bit more creepy, at least. There were a few creepy parts, but it was really nothing worth even reading a 4-hour book for. So it was just a little bit disappointing to me. I also believe this was marketed as a horror book, and it was just not that for me. It was also a little bit confusing. I think I do discuss this in another vlog, but it just there isn't a whole lot to say about it. It just wasn't, it missed the mark for me. I also read And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer by Fredrik Backman, which I expected to cry and I didn't. So that kind of was a little bit of a disappointment, but I'm not going to knock the book for that. I've seen so many people crying or being upset about this book, like, in a beautiful way, and I was hoping for it to touch me as well. And it just, I mean, it was a very touching book, don't get me wrong. It was a very emotional book, and I could see why other people would become so emotional like that over it. But for me, it just wasn't quite, it didn't quite hit that. I still gave it 5 stars. I thought it was a beautiful book about um, losing someone before you lose them. You know, it was, the things it touched on was very sad, and it was just kind of like a reflection on this man's life. And it was a really short read. It's a novella, so if you have a moment, I would highly recommend it. I also picked up the new Stuart Turton book, The Last Murder at the End of the World. And in classic Stuart Turton fashion, I felt like the writing was very complex. This was a 4-star for me. I enjoyed it a lot. The twist, or I should say twists, really had me. Um, but it was slow in the same fashion. If you enjoyed The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, I think you would also enjoy this book as well. It was slow, the build up in his way, that the same way that he did in Evelyn Hardcastle. It was just really good though. It was a different take on things, on the end of the world. It was interesting. When we finally find out what the fog was, that was kind of creepy. But yeah, I don't want to give too much away with this book because there's so many things that happen. It was good. You should read it. The last book I want to talk about for June is The Woman in Me by Britney Spears. I really enjoyed this memoir. I gave it a 5-star. I can't imagine I would rate it any lower than that. It was amazing. Just getting that little bit of insight from her was something else. I have loved Britney for as long as I can remember. You know, I was a little girl singing her songs in my room, and it just takes me back. And I have a lot of fond memories of her music, of her concerts and stuff. And it was really heartbreaking to read the things that have happened to her and the way people have made her feel and the things she's had to overcome. I would highly recommend this book. It does have some, things that it touches on that are very sensitive. So I would go into it knowing that, but it is really so good. And I am so grateful to her for sharing this part of her life with us, with, complete strangers, with her fans. And yeah, it was just such a beautiful book. So that wraps up all the books I've read in June. I would love to know if you have read any of these books and what your thoughts were. Is there anything that we've both read that we differ on the rating? I would love to read your comments down below. That's all I have for you guys today. If you enjoyed this, please give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you want to see more content from me. Until my next video, I'll see you guys later. Bye.